Hello and welcome to the New World Review, your source for everything anime and manga, and more specifically, welcome to the Hunter x Hunter arc review, where today we are going to be tackling our first truly grand piece of storytelling in the series with the Yorknew City arc. Yorknew City is the fourth arc in the series, consisting of a mighty 56 manga chapters, as well as 26 episodes of the original 1999 anime adaptation and 22 episodes of the 2011 series. So as stated before, we do have quite the lengthy piece of story here with this arc and the first true display of the kind of storytelling Togashi would elect to engage in going forward. So Yorknew City is a groundbreaking arc in the series for many reasons, the first of which is that it actively makes the decision to remove the focus on our main protagonist Gon and instead promote Kurapika briefly into this lead role. Of course, that doesn't mean that Gon is relegated to the background. He is actually quite a huge part in this arc, but the driving force is undeniably Kurapika. And going through the series the first time around, I wasn't quite sure how to feel about this, because of the four protagonists introduced during the Hunter exam arc, Kurapika was easily my least favorite. However, Yorknew City took this character and made him quite possibly the most compelling force in the series to this point, and possibly even beyond. And I think a lot of that comes from two very big narrative strengths, one of which is the classic revenge story motive. It's just so easy for readers and watchers, or at the very least me, to get on board with revenge because it's always about an underdog taking on powers far greater than them and the satisfaction of seeing them succeed, or the tragedy that the corruption of revenge inevitably brings. The other very well done aspect of Kurapika though is portraying him as a natural genius, which is usually great because when done correctly, these characters can very effectively guide you through the most interesting and well thought out scenarios, although I say when done correctly because this idea can very easily fall apart and become annoyingly pretentious. So it is a very difficult thing to pull off really, because to have a genius level character, you as an author really need to put some serious thought into it, and to be perfectly honest, a lot of authors who tackle these kind of characters just don't have the mental commitment to do so. But in the case of Kurapika, it's a genuinely compelling feature, and watching him think and act makes me personally feel smarter, although that feeling is a complete and utter lie. Yorknew City is much more complex than just one protagonist though, because as mentioned before, we do also have a narrative thread going with Gon, Killua, and even Leorio. But there is another massive group of individuals who take center stage during the arc, which are the Phantom Troop. Now at first, it's very easy to classify these figures as antagonists of the arc, the figures of evil that Kurapika is hunting down, but as time goes on in Yorknew City, that perception becomes wildly skewed, and I would actually go so far as to say that this cohort becomes another group of protagonists. And it's because we end up spending an awful lot of time with them, almost as much as with Kurapika, Gon, and Killua, and we really get to know them personally. Well, a select few of them anyway. But that goes a long way towards humanizing them, which is crazy because they are introduced as brutal killers who massacre the Mafia auction, as well as murder a few characters that we were nice and familiar with at the time. But over the course of this arc, many of these characters have very empathetic moments. For example, after the death of Ubugin, we get some great insight into the sadness and rage felt by Nobunaga, even though nothing is explicitly stated. But it conveys a sense of how deep their camaraderie was, and in regards to Nobunaga specifically, his character is given even further depth by showing his sense of humor, generally in regards to anything involving Gon and Killua. But another fantastic example is Pakunoda, who provides the emotional climax of Yorknew City with her sacrifice to provide the troop with valuable information as well as save the life of Crollo. Watching her forego her life and shoot the rest of the troop with the memory bomb bullets is such an astonishingly heartbreaking moment because I never could have imagined myself feeling anything for these characters at the beginning of the arc. They were just that well done. And there you go, there really is a kind of twisted argument to be made that Kurapika almost comes off as more of the villain in Yorknew City than the Phantom Troop do, because from their perspective, this is a story of a group being hunted and killed by an unseen force and have to scramble to come together to defeat this threat. I mean, there is a lot of context you need to ignore to see it that way, such as their penchant for murder, which is an ongoing theme that gets brought up a lot. Kurapika even questions Ubugin and Crollo on the matter, and Gon brings it up in the presence of Nobunaga, and every time the troop are faced with this question, they don't have a convincing answer for themselves, it's just what they do. Meanwhile though, Kurapika ends up coming off as quite villainous because by the end of Yorknew City, kind of loses himself, succumbing to rage and revenge. So much so that his plan in the end isn't even particularly successful. I mean, yeah, he prevents Crollo from contacting the troop and using Nen, but by then he had realized that the troop are not a group so easily defeated by the loss of their leader, and they are in fact significantly more human, and in their own way, they work to ensure the survival of the spider as a whole. So in the end, Kurapika didn't really succeed in accomplishing a whole lot, and his ultimate revenge plan was effectively effectively defeated by the strong bond of the Phantom Troop, which is a really weird way to think about the arc, but it's true. Neither party really came out of this conflict as a victor, and as a result, the conclusion of Yorknew City leaves this weird aftertaste because there's no real satisfaction from its events. It's quite a realistic depiction of revenge being taken against figures that are inherently human. So there's all sorts of complex emotions playing about, and as it often is in reality, it just kind of ends in a big, unsatisfying mess that no one really predicted. An enjoyable mess though, a very enjoyable mess. And you know, in general, Yorknew represents a pretty big tonal shift in Hunter x Hunter, which colors it a shade darker through a wide variety of factors, one of which is Kurapika's seemingly relentless quest for revenge, and the kind of actions that he was willing to take to ensure it. I mean, for example, when he and Melody first started speaking, she judged that he would be more than willing to kill her if she was in any way threatening to his cause. But it's not just that, the world itself becomes a much darker place through the exploration of the various mafia factions, as well as the Phantom Troop, and we even get some interaction with the professional assassination world of the Zoldyck family. It really is a crash course of the underbelly of the Hunter x Hunterverse, and there's a lot of really almost sickening stuff at play that just gets taken for granted, like the whole concept of flesh collectors, one of which is personified by the most innocent looking character in the entire arc, Lestrade. And it really is such a striking juxtaposition that a girl like her would be so heavily involved in this trade and just think that it's a completely normal hobby. Speaking of Neon though, she along with Chrollo and Kurapika bring one of the most interesting features of Yorknew City, which is the proper introduction of Nen specialists, and the further deepening of just how insane this art form can get. Each of the 3 specialist abilities we get to explore in this arc are extremely fascinating, but I find myself most taken in by Neon's lovely Ghostwriter ability, which accurately predicts fortunes of individuals with simple information, but it is restricted by the amount of time it can peer into the future, as well as delivering it through cryptic poetry. Lovely Ghostwriter just adds a fantastic element of intrigue to the arc, especially after Chrollo acquires it via his own specialist ability, Bandit Secret, which is more terrifying than anything, and sets Chrollo up to be an incredible powerhouse figure. And finally, Kurapika's Emperor Time was and still is the epitome of fantastically driven Nen use. It immediately elevates Kurapika to the status of one of the best Nen users in the series, but at the same time it also goes to serve to solidify a lot of Nen knowledge by providing the calculations of how under the conditions of Emperor Time, Kurapika can maximize the efficiency of each of his own non-natural Nen areas. Plus it also results in the great versatility of his chain abilities, and every use of those were just amazing. And a good highlight in regards to that would be the fight against Duvagin, which was such a brilliant display of dominance from Kurapika, as are most battles in Hunter x Hunter actually. I mean, not from Kurapika personally, but when you think about it, most fights in Hunter x Hunter are very, very one-sided, and yet they're so compelling. Something interesting in that. But I love how Togashi still makes these combat-focused segments a true pleasure to experience, even though the victor is often clear right from the beginning. And that's a very intriguing talent because you'd suspect that the best possible action sequences would come from even matchups, but nope, this series goes on to prove that very wrong. With that said, there was a slightly more even matchup that I would like to highlight between Chrollo and the Zoldicks. This was such a great spectacle to see, and it made me want ever so much more from these 3 figures involved. And the best part about it was that it was such an intriguing mental battle more than anything. I mean, the physical action was great, but the meat of it was really seeing the thoughts of Zeno and Chrollo, and how a fight needs to be fought once mentally before it can actually be implemented physically. And now one of the last things I'd like to touch on is that Yorknew City is a bit of a bizarre arc narratively, because it spends an awful lot of time actually setting up the arc immediately after it, being Greed Island. So almost everything to do with Gon and Killua is working towards that end. And in fact, Yorknew City actually begins with Gon and Killua on the hunt for the Greed Island game, and then it slowly morphs into the actual Yorknew City arc. And a lot of this is great because it means that these 2 arcs flow very naturally together, although I will say that it was definitely my least favorite stuff about Yorknew City, especially when we go into a ton of depth about the world of auctions and their various processes. So for example, there is an entire chapter focused on the wooden vault and the various ways to potentially counterfeit it, as well as the concept of deflators in auctions who actively work to drive prices down, and it's all very legitimately fascinating information, but it just feels so out of place within the greater context of the arc. And yes, I know that the wooden vault discussion does come back to help Gon and Killua escape once from Nobunaga, oddly enough, but a whole chapter that describes a niche faction of auctions and reads almost like a textbook was just kind of weird. Interesting, yes, but weird, and it kind of broke the flow of the story, and I will stand by the fact that not enough of it comes back into the story to justify taking an entire chapter just to describe it. I feel like Togashi was just heavily invested in auctions and the concept of auctions at the time, and so he put that passion into his work, and well, he got a bit carried away, which certainly does happen in the future of the series as well. And finally, I'd just like to leave you all with one very interesting line from gone, with some great foreshadowing in which he comes to accept his own fairly selfish ways of operating, and in fact he says to Killua, "I'm the one who's reckless. You have to keep me in line." And wow, that's quite something to read in retrospect. I mean, I highly doubt that Togashi had Gon's eventual story planned out at this point in the series, but looking back on it, it's safe to say that Killua kind of failed in that regard. But that's very much Yorknew City. A fantastic first offering of a grander arc with far more intricate storytelling and a shifting focus from the general idea of shonen, which infinitely expands the world and provides a very gripping narrative. I mean, so long as we're not being given a lecture of the technical implementation of an auction. But that pretty much does it for the Yorknew City arc. If you enjoyed this video and the content this channel produced in general, then please do consider donating to the New World Review Patreon, because the support of all of you amazing people is what continues to make this channel possible. And if Patreon isn't quite your style, then please do leave this video a like, share, or subscribe, because it also helps support this channel an incredible amount. And if you'd like to join the fun at any time, then please do head over to my Discord server, where a wide array of shenaniganry takes place on a daily basis. And finally, please do comment with your thoughts on the Yorknew City arc. This has been the New World Review, and I'll see you next time. What's your favorite game of all time? You know, I think I'd have to go with Diablo 2. I've played a lot of games in my day, but I don't think I've ever gone back to something as consistently as Diablo 2. I mean, back in high school, I'd replay this thing at least once a year and spend at least 2 solid weeks heavily invested into it. And even now I go back to it every couple of years, which I think is insane because it's like 20 years old, but it's just such a good game.